That lovely ambient sound is the sound of the brand new NYX from Dreadbox FX. Welcome to SonicLAB. I'm Nick Batt, editor of Sonicstate, and this is indeed what we're looking at. NYX is an analog 2-oscillator desktop semi-modular synthesizer. Why NYX? It's not in reference to me, although it would have been flattering. It's actually the name of the Greek goddess of the night, as in with Erebus. Erebus is also a reference to Greek mythology too. So this is the unit. It is very similar in kind of size to the Erebus. It's got the same analog oscillators, 2 of them. It's got a dual filter and it uses modulators instead of regular ADSRs, and there are 3 of those, 2 assignable and 1 VCA. The other thing that it's got, as you remember, the Erebus had a analog or / digital delay. This has got that reverb unit, which is what you heard at the beginning, and it's sort of this massive kind of cavernous, ethereal kind of the night reverb, and that's really kind of where this talent lies. So let's take a look at the oscillators. We've got oscillator 1 has sawtooth wave and square wave, but with a dedicated pulse width slider, 32/16/8 footage. Oscillator 2 has sawtooth and triangle wave. Again, they both got individual glide control. There's also a sync function, which is new, and this only does 16/8/4. So if we come to the scope, because I know how much you enjoy the scope, let's just have a look at the sawtooth wave. Now you can see there, it's an interesting shape. It's not actually your kind of traditional shape. I mean, well, it's basically the traditional shape, but it's got this kind of quite high peak. And just out of interest, you might wonder how I'm getting this out, because if I took the reverb on, it's not changing. There's a little trick. You take the audio input and you take that as an output. That actually outputs a dry signal pre-effects, just in case you wanted to know. It's a little bit lower signal than the rest, but it's just a useful thing if you might want to use that. So like I say, there's this sort of spike, which I think maybe adds the additional harmonics. Let's take a look at the square wave. Move it through the pulse width. Again, it's got this sort of slightly non-traditional feel to it, with these kind of peaks at the vertical lines. So it's a little bit different, but it still sounds very square. And coming back to the triangle wave, slightly shark-toothy, but pretty good shape. And that's the thing, as with the Erebus, they've got this kind of extra weight and substance to them. You know, there's plenty of buzz, but there's also a lot of kind of girth to them. They sound very kind of weighty, so you've got a good starting point before you even start to filter or deal with the effects. Oscillator sync. Get that traditional wave. But the other thing you'll notice, if I come out of sync mode, we can actually now tune the oscillators a fifth plus a semitones up. So with the Erebus, there was a slight problem in the fact that you couldn't really tune the oscillators all that widely apart from the front panel. But on this, you do get a fifth, so you can have. And if I come back to the unit, I can also modulate the pulse width modulation using one of these modulators, which also work in LFO mode as well as envelope mode. So if I just plug that in. And using this little pot here, I can affect the depth of that. So yes, goes through 0, which always makes me very happy. There's also the ability for this vibrato, which goes reasonably high into the audio rates. And it's got a nice logarithmic control here, so you know, when you want to dial in just a little bit, you can dial in a little bit. I will say one thing that is a little bit frustrating, we've got this large tuning knob, which I think is probably an aesthetic thing, but it's very easy to knock slightly when you're moving these, and that's just an operational thing. But you know, once you start being careful, you just remember not to knock it because it affects the overall tuning. I should say that this actually tunes both oscillators, this only tunes the interval. So let's just take a little look at the hardware again. We've got these kind of plywood wooden end cheeks. Front panel, same sort of knob control. Faders feel okay. Yes, they wobble a bit, but faders generally do that. We'll just take a look at the rear connections. We've got a MIDI in, which is how I'm driving this at the moment. We've also got a MIDI through, so you can pass this on. Audio input or output, as I'm using in this case, for processing external audio, and then a straight output. Comes with an external power supply. As with the Erebus, the MIDI input is converted into CV via an internal MIDI to CV, and we can access those things by the patch bay as well. So on the patch bay, we've got the CV output, which is from the external MIDI. We've got the gate output from the external MIDI. There's also a mod signal, so if you send a modulation MIDI control its output here via CV. Other little bits that we got on the patch bay, we've got the separate modulators 1 and 2 with the depth on 2, and we've also got VCO2 output, so we can actually audio rate mod some of the inputs as well. Inputs are separate oscillators because obviously we can drive these oscillators separately, which also brings us back to the notion that we can drive this in paraphonic mode because it is actually a paraphonic synthesizer. Put a bit of reverb on it. So the filter is obviously the next major thing, and this is where it differs from the Erebus in that it's got a dual filter. It's got two two-pole filters which you can run in series or parallel. Obviously if they're in series, then you end up with a 4-pole filter. So let's just take a listen to how that sounds. So this is a sawtooth. No resonance, half resonance. Starts to bring those lovely kind of Dreadbox style low harmonics in. 3/4. Full resonance. So coming back here, the thing that's different really is the fact that it's got a dual filter. So effectively what I can do here is I can set the master cutoff, then I can offset the second of the 2 poles. You can hear that in the resonance. What you can hear is you get these kind of 2 filter peaks. When you can really hear it in full resonance mode, that's why I'm using that. So you can hear that there are 2 peaks that are kind of you can move apart, and that adds an awful lot of additional character. Stick a bit of reverb on. And you can get some very interesting harmonics there, although you can use it in a traditional mode as well. Now, this is where things get a little bit complicated because the routing of the filter is actually quite a complex thing. It's possible to split the oscillators so that they go into the filters in different ways. The first thing we can do is switch it to high pass mode, which basically gives us a high pass filter. When together, that's obviously a 4-pole high pass filter, adding that resonance. We get those pleasant harmonics that the high-pass filter gets. So as I said, the filter routing is actually kind of complicated. I'm going to try and demonstrate it here. As you can see, I'm going to use these switches here. But what I've got in this patch is just basically the keyboard is playing just the filter. So I've got the CV output of the MIDI interface going into the VCF frequency. So now I can just play a straight sine wave, which is very lovely. So now what I'm going to do, we've been through the high pass filter, so I'm going to go to the even filter setting, and the even filter setting is both filters are set to low pass, so 2 2-pole low pass. But as you can see, I've tuned the filters separately, so we've got like this kind of fifth between the 2 filters. So essentially we've got 2 sine wave oscillators, which is pretty cool. I switch it to odd. And what happens is that is the low pass filter and that is a high pass filter. So we've got a different quality of harmonic. Now what I can do, and this is where things get interesting, I can start to bring up the other sounds. So that's both oscillators going into the filters. But now if we come back to here, this handles the actual routing of the oscillators. In split mode, VCO1 goes to VCF1 and VCO2 goes to VCF2. And you can hear there's a low pass filter on the lower note and a high pass filter on the higher note. So in odd mode, we've got a low pass and a high pass, which are in parallel. Now if I go to half routing, the half routing is both VCOs are sent only to the second VCO. So you hear there's more of a high pass filter characteristic. So you got that. So next setting is the interesting one as well. So we can actually then go to VCA mode, which what this actually does is now brings both of the oscillators bypassing the filters. So effectively, if I take them down, I've got my fifths on the filter resonance only. I can bring in the low oscillator VCO2, which is just coming directly at. So now I've got this essentially four note chord. So 4 sources. So this routing actually provides quite a lot of flexibility, though I have to say it's quite mind-blowing in terms of how you set this up, and it's also a little bit kind of unintuitive. It's very hard to find those sweet spots, but they are there. So if we just come back to this now, the next part is the routing of the modulators. So in this mode, modulator 1, if I take that down, is going to both filters. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm using this in envelope mode. And I'm just dialing in a little bit. So on key press I get this release portion, this sort of sustain portion. This is not logarithmic actually, which is a little bit disappointing because it's quite hard to dial in the right amount. So in dual mode, both of these modulators go to both the VCFs. In split mode, modulator 1 only modulates the VCF frequency of VCF1. And in odd mode, modulator 1 controls both VCFs and modulator 2 controls VCF2 only. So it's so in this mode, this one controls VCF1, this one controls VCF2. I mean, it sounds complicated because it is complicated, and there's no two ways about it. But what it does do is allow you to kind of create these quite powerful voices. When combined with the reverb, you get these quite interesting sounds. And of course, we've got the ability to then change the glide of the. So we can get some really complicated sounds, but I think I was just trying to illustrate. I was trying to find a way to illustrate the complexity of this, and to do it in a single patch is kind of the easiest way. So one more trick up the sleeve. In this patch, which I've still got running, I can take the output of VCO2, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to modulate the post filter setting, which is essentially the second filter. So if I bring that in here and play, and now dial this up, if I take the sounds down, I'm essentially modulating post parameter in audio rate mod with the depth here via this little pot. So you can start to see how you can build up the complexities here in the routing. As I said, I was being very careful not to touch any of these knobs or these knobs because it'll kind of destroy the tuning that I've set up, and it's actually quite hard to find those spots. But when they're there, you know, it's nice to be able to get to them. Right, that's the filter and the routing. We should take a look at the modulators now, because these are also something that are different to what you might have seen on other synthesizers. So now I'm just going to run a sequence off the BeatStep Pro. And now you can see I'm just triggering the modulator. So I'm going to bring the frequency down. I'm going to start dialing in. So now this is working as an envelope. I can set it so that the release only happens after the note off by switching the hold, or I can switch it into LFO mode. Turn it into an LFO. Let's stick it back into, bring a bit of resonance up. So what I've also done is I've taken the output of modulator 2 and I've routed that directly into the VCF. So now this is working as an LFO. I'll just stop that a second. I should point out, right, this is one thing that's in envelope mode. It's always retrigger mode. There's no legato mode for any of these modulators. And when this is in LFO mode, if I switch the hold on, we can see how this works. So if I go this way, we get essentially a sawtooth. If I go this way, we get an inverse sawtooth. Bring it up here, takes us into sort of triangle mode. Now that's the slowest it goes, which doesn't feel all that slow to me, and that's the fastest it goes in LFO mode. So the modulators, while flexible, there's a problem with the range. You know, I can't put it any other way, because as this synth sounds so great into this sort of massive reverb, you sort of want maybe that LFO to be slower, because you like this sort of long, kind of languid modulations, and it just doesn't go slow enough. Really, that's as slow as this one goes. This one goes slightly faster than this guy in LFO mode, but it just doesn't have a range. I would love to have seen maybe a range switch for one or both of the modulators, so you could have low and high mode, because that would give us a lot more flexibility. And then sort of nature of the sound of this thing is really much more about these kind of evolving pads. I mean, yes, it will do those kind of short staccato things, but it sounds great into the reverb. And, you know, particularly when you've got these massive harmonics, it's sort of, you want to move through that slowly. You know, additionally, if I went into sync mode, I'd want to maybe make that sync slower. I mean, it's okay in a... but it just doesn't quite have the range, I think is all I'm trying to say. Right, let's take a look at the reverb now, because obviously this is a really big part of the whole beast. So we'll come out of sync mode, let's just play. So what the reverb basically does, it's by Crazy Tube Circuits. It's a third-party circuit in here, and this affects kind of the pre-delay. It feels like, it says time, and then we got decay. So the shortest setting is still quite long. And this seems to affect the pre-delay to my ear hearing. And then the longest setting is frankly epic. And I really like it. It's got this kind of quality. It is mono, obviously, but it's got this real sort of quality to it that's just when you start bringing these harmonics in, it's absolutely massive. I mean, the bottom end is huge, and on a big set of speakers, it really shakes the room. And this is where NYX really kind of shines for me, because it's a beautiful ambient. You've got to watch out, it does clip a little bit when you really hit it hard. But honestly, I mean, what's not to like about that? It sounds absolutely lovely. You can modulate one of the reverb parameters. I'll use this one. We'll see what it actually does. It's kind of, when you turn it up to full, you get this sort of pitch modulation. I think the time must affect something to do with the actual algorithm, which has got the modulation part of it. I mean, it's kind of Blade Runner, isn't it? It's a Blade Runner machine. That's what it sounds like. I mean, this and a big cinematic picture, and you could be lost forever in this kind of beautiful sound. And I think that's where the strength of the NYX lies. I mean, the sound of this epic reverb and the quality of those oscillators. The filters sound nice, but they're a little bit complicated to use. I mean, you know, the dual filter is a lovely idea, and you can get some things, but it doesn't feel like the benefits of having dual filters kind of give you enough sonic flexibility if it was just a real great single mode filter. Or in fact, what would be really nice is to be able to control the resonance and the frequency individually of the filters, and then maybe have a switch to tie them together in 4-pole mode. But, you know, it's a small unit, there's not an awful lot of space on it. And I think the thing about the NYX is it sounds lovely. It is limited. There are limitations. I mean, like I say, the modulators are the big one for me, because they're just not slow enough and not fast enough. But, you know, we've also got to bear in mind that this is a kind of boutique synthesizer, small Greek manufacturer. This particular unit is all through hole. I think they might be moving to surface mount technology in the future, which might bring the price down. The price, which at the moment is around 529 quid. So it's about £100 more than the Erebus. I'm guessing that's partly to do with the fact that there's the reverb in there, and the dual filter topography is bound to give you a lot more complexity. So we might see a reduction in price. But if you're looking for something that just has a real character and does something unusual, then Dreadbox, you know, make lots of those kind of synths, and the NYX is no exception. I just think, you know, it is quite an expensive option at the moment, so you know, you're really going to want it. But if you get it, it's one of those things that you easily fall in love with and think, oh yeah, it allows you to spend time sort of noodling and just making lovely ambient textures, and that's a good thing, right? That's it. See you next time.